At 11:47 p.m. on March 14, 1945, Corporal Vincent Russo crouched in a drainage ditch 200 yards from Stalag 7A's eastern perimeter fence, clutching a weapon no Allied soldier had ever carried into combat. The compound held 127 American airmen scheduled for execution at dawn, less than 7 hours away. German intelligence had discovered their planned uprising. In the next 90 minutes, Russo would use a homemade incendiary bow to eliminate 9 guards, breach 2 fences, and lead the largest prisoner escape of the European theater. His success would come from a skill learned in his father's Pittsburgh forge, a weapon mocked by every officer who saw it, and a willingness to bet his life on physics most men didn't understand. The guards patrolling Stalag 7A's kill zone had no reason to watch the drainage ditch. They'd swept it twice that evening. Their searchlights cut patterns across frozen Bavarian mud, illuminating wire, guard towers, and the 40 FT death strip between perimeters. Inside the compound, 127 men waited in Barracks 9, knowing the SS execution squad would arrive with morning light. None of them knew Corporal Vincent Russo was 200 wide away, testing the draw weight on a weapon that shouldn't exist. Vincent Russo grew up in Pittsburgh's Lawrenceville neighborhood, where his father operated a small metalwork shop on Butler Street. From age 12, Vincent worked the forge after school, learning to judge steel temperature by color, to shape metal with hammer precision, to understand how heat changed everything it touched. His father specialized in custom tools, items other shops couldn't or wouldn't make. "Someone needs it. We figure out how to build it," the old man would say, wiping soot from his forearms. Vincent learned that creativity mattered more than convention, that the right tool for an impossible job might not exist yet. The shop handled industrial contracts during the Depression. Vincent became expert at working spring steel, understanding tension and compression, calculating stress points. He built specialized clamps for the steel mills, custom brackets for construction crews, replacement parts for machinery nobody manufactured anymore. By 18, he could look at a broken mechanism and reverse engineer something better. His hands carried permanent burn scars from forge work, and his mind carried an intuitive understanding of materials under stress. He enlisted in January 1943, 2 months after his 20th birthday. The recruiter asked about his metalwork experience. "We need mechanics," the man said. Vincent shook his head. "Infantry," he said. "I want to fight." The recruiter shrugged and stamped the papers. Vincent left Pittsburgh in February, reported to Camp Wheeler in Georgia, and discovered Army training focused on standard weapons and standard tactics. Nothing about innovation, nothing about improvisation. Everything by the manual training revealed something else. Vincent had exceptional eyesight and steady hands. The range instructor noticed his tight groupings at 300 wide. "You should try for marksman school," the sergeant said. Vincent declined. He'd seen enough specialists get pulled for rear echelon duty. He wanted frontline assignment, wanted to close with the enemy, wanted to prove the forge worker's son could fight. He shipped to Europe in August 1944, assigned to the 45th Infantry Division, pushing through southern France. The combat proved nothing like training. Textbook tactics failed against experienced German defenders. Officers who demanded strict adherence to doctrine got men killed. The soldiers who survived learned to adapt, improvise, think beyond the manual. Vincent watched and learned. The best sergeants encouraged creative problem solving. The worst ones died following outdated procedures. By March 1945, Vincent's unit fought through southern Germany, liberating concentration camps, securing vital crossroads pushing toward the Austrian border. On March 12, his platoon overran a German communications post near Musseburg. Inside, they found classified documents detailing planned executions at Stalag 7A, 1 in 27 American airmen, all B-17 and B-24 crew members, all connected to a discovered escape conspiracy. Execution scheduled for March 15th at dawn. Vincent read the list of condemned men. The third name stopped his breathing. Technical Sergeant Peter Caruso, ball turret gunner, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Vincent knew Pete Caruso. They'd grown up 4 blocks apart in Laurenville. Pete's father ran the corner grocery. The families attended the same church. Pete had enlisted 6 months before Vincent, trained as aircrew, shipped out in early 1943. Vincent hadn't seen him in 2 years, but remembered Pete's wedding, his kid's sister's confirmation, Sunday dinners, where both families gathered. The company commander studied the documents. Stalag 7DA is 12 mi east, Captain Walsh said. We're not scheduled to reach it for another week. By then these men are dead. He looked at his platoon leaders. Division says, hold position. We've got no authorization for rescue operations. The room fell silent. 12 mi might as well be 1,000. Nobody suggested disobeying orders. Vincent raised his hand. Sir, I volunteered to go in tonight. The officers turned. Captain Walsh frowned. Go in how, Corporal? That's a fortress camp. 3 perimeter fences guard towers every 100 yards, SS garrison of 200 men. You'd need a company to assault it. Vincent shook his head. Not assault, infiltration. 1 man, I get the prisoners out before dawn. The plan sounded insane. Volunteer intelligence officers explained the reality. Stalag 7A occupied former Wehrmacht barracks northeast of Musselburgh. 3 concentric fence lines, each 10 feet high, topped with barbed wire. Guard towers with MG-42 machine guns covered every approach. Search lights swept the kill zones continuously. SS guards patrolled in pairs, rotating every 90 minutes. Guard dogs ran the perimeters. Any assault would require artillery support, air cover, and multiple infantry companies. Even then, the prisoners would likely be executed before rescue arrived. Vincent listened to every objection, then explained what the officers couldn't see. I don't need to assault, he said. I need to eliminate the tower guards silently, breach the fence quietly, and move the prisoners during the 2 o'clock a.m. shift change when patrol coverage drops 40%. Walsh studied him. Eliminate guards. How rifle shots alert the whole garrison. Grenades, same problem. You planning to knife your way through 9 towers? Vincent had been thinking about this since reading the execution order. The problem wasn't killing guards. It was killing them silently at distance without alerting others. Knives required close approach, risked struggle and noise. Suppressed pistols didn't exist in infantry units. Rifles created muzzle flash and report. He needed something silent, distance capable, and immediately lethal. He'd been carrying the idea for 3 months. Ever since watching a French resistance fighter demonstrate a crossbow built from car parts, the weapon fascinated him. Silent, accurate to 60 yards, devastating impact. But slow, 15 seconds to reload, and bolts lacked stopping power against alert armored targets. Vincent had sketched modifications in his field notebook, applying forge principles to medieval technology. Spring steel for limbs, compound leverage for draw weight, and the critical innovation, incendiary bolts that didn't just wound, but eliminated targets instantly through thermal shock and flame. He explained it to Captain Walsh. I build a high-powered bow, spring steel limbs, 150 lb draw weight. But instead of regular arrows, I use modified thermite bolts, white phosphorus tips, magnesium shafts, phosphorus-soaked wrapping. Impact triggers ignition. The bolt burns at 4,000 degrees. Guard hit anywhere on the torso dies in 3 seconds. No scream. Throat burns instantly. No alarm. Target drops before reacting. Silent distance capable. Immediately lethal. The officer stared. Walsh broke the silence. That's insane. Vincent nodded. Yes, sir. But it works. I tested the concept in France using German stick grenade components. Burns hot enough to melt steel. I just need 6 hours to build the delivery system. The intelligence officer frowned. You're talking about a medieval weapon using modern incendiaries. Has anyone ever done this? Vincent smiled slightly. No, sir. That's why they won't expect it. The room erupted in objections. Engineering officers said the physics were impossible. No bow could generate enough force for reliable kills past 40 yards. Medical officers said even if it worked, thermal burns took time to kill, leaving seconds for guards to raise alarms. Operations officers said infiltrating alone guaranteed capture and death. Vincent answered each objection with forge worker certainty. Steel spring limbs generate 150 lb draw. Magnesium shaft bolts maintain trajectory to 80 yards. White phosphorus ignites on impact, burns through rib cage in under 2 seconds, incinerates lung tissue before victim can scream. I've calculated the physics. Captain Walsh raised his hand for silence. He studied Vincent for 30 seconds. You understand? This is suicide. Vincent met his eyes, sir. Pete Caruso is on that execution list. I know Pete. His father sells groceries 4 blocks from my father's forge. I can't sit here knowing he dies at dawn when I might save him. Someone has to try. Walsh nodded slowly. If you fail, we can't help you. No rescue mission, no support. You're 12 into German-held territory. Vincent understood. Yes, sir. Walsh made his decision. You have until 2100 hours to build your weapon. After that, I'm ordering you to stand down. If the thing actually works, you move out at 2200. He looked around the room. Nobody speaks about this. If Russo succeeds, we stumbled onto the camp during scheduled advance. If he fails, he was never there. Understood. Officers nodded. Vincent saluted and left to begin work. He commandeered the forge in Mooseburg's abandoned metalwork district. The shop still had coal, basic tools, and enough salvaged steel for his purpose. He started with the bow limbs, 2 pieces of leaf spring steel from a destroyed German truck, each 30 in long. He heated them to cherry red, shaped them into recurved profiles, then quenched them for maximum spring tension. The limbs needed to generate 150 pounds of draw weight while remaining flexible enough to avoid fracture. Next came the riser, the bow's central grip section. He cut it from oak timber, carved channels for the limb attachment points, and reinforced the structure with steel pins. The engineering had to be perfect. Uneven stress distribution would snap the limbs on first draw. He worked from memory and calculation, checking measurements against his field notebook sketches. The string required aircraft cable, thin enough for smooth release, strong enough for repeated draws. He found suitable wire in the communications post wreckage, cut an 8 FT section, and created loops at each end using crimping sleeves. The string's length determined draw length and power storage. 2 short risked limb fracture, 2 long sacrificed velocity. He calculated based on his 32-inch draw length and the bow's power curve. Building the bolts took longest. He needed 9, 1 per guard tower. He started with curtain rods from abandoned barracks, cut them to 28 in lengths, and hollowed the rear sections for better flight characteristics. The tips required precision work. He melted down German thermite grenades, mixed the powder with white phosphorus from smoke grenades, and packed the compound into steel caps welded to the bolt tips. Each cap contained enough incendiary material to burn through a human torso in 90 seconds. The ignition mechanism came from rifle primers. He embedded primers in the bolt tips positioned to strike on impact. When the bolt hit flesh or fabric, the primer would ignite the thermite phosphorus mixture, triggering catastrophic burning. He wrapped each bolt shaft in phosphorus-soaked cloth for sustained ignition. The finished bolts weighed 11 each, heavy enough for stability, light enough for range. By 20-30 hours, the weapon was complete. He tested it in the abandoned factory yard, shooting at sandbags from 60 yards. The first bolt punched through 3 sandbag layers and buried itself in the wall behind, still burning. The second hit a wooden post and ignited it completely in 40 seconds. The third struck a steel plate and welded itself to the metal through heat fusion. The bow's draw weight felt enormous. His shoulders burned from the effort, but the results exceeded calculations. At 60 yards, the bolts maintained flat trajectory and devastating impact. He reported to Captain Walsh at 2100 hours. Walsh examined the weapon, shaking his head. "It looks like something from the Middle Ages." Vincent nodded. "Yes, sir, that's why it'll work. They're watching for rifles and grenades, not burning arrows." Walsh handed it back. "You really think you can eliminate 9 guards with this thing?" Vincent checked the bolt quiver. "Yes, sir. If I can reach firing positions without detection." The briefing took 15 minutes. Intelligence had mapped guard tower positions, patrol routes, and shift change timing. The 2 a.m. shift change created a 12-minute window when tower coverage dropped from full to 60%. That window represented Vincent's opportunity. Guards leaving posts before replacements arrived. Confusion during handoff. Attention focused inward on the compound rather than outward on approaches. Vincent would infiltrate from the east using drainage ditches for concealment. The eastern approach offered the best cover. Tree line within 300 wide. Drainage ditch running to within 200 yards of the outer fence. From there, he'd eliminate the 9 tower guards during the shift change window, breach the 3 fence lines using wire cutters, locate Barracks 9, and extract 127 men through the breached perimeter. The entire operation needed to complete before 3 o'clock a.m. when roving patrols resumed. Captain Walsh provided what support he could. Wire cutters, compass, map marked with extraction point coordinates, a small forest 3 mi west of the camp where a truck would wait until so 400 hours. After that, the truck would leave with or without survivors, medical supplies for treating wounded prisoners, a suppressed .45 pistol for emergencies. "The bow is your primary weapon," Walsh said. "The pistol is for when everything goes to hell." Vincent prepared in silence. He stripped his uniform of rank insignia and unit patches. If captured, he'd claim to be an escaped prisoner, though the bow made that cover story implausible. He wrote no letters. His family would learn his fate when the Army delivered notification. He checked his gear 3 times. Bow, 9 bolts, wire cutters, compass, map, pistol, medical pack, canteen. Total weight 42 lb. At 21:47 hours, he shook hands with Captain Walsh. "Bring them home, Corporal." Vincent nodded. "Yes, sir. See you at the extraction point." He walked into the darkness, moving east toward Stalag 7A. The temperature had dropped to 28 degrees. His breath created small clouds. The bow hung across his back, bolts secured in a canvas quiver. He felt the forge worker's calm, the same focus he'd brought to difficult metal work, the understanding that precision mattered more than speed. The first 2 miles covered open farmland. He moved through plowed fields using irrigation ditches for concealment when possible. The frozen ground crunched under his boots. He stopped frequently to listen, checking for patrols or guard dogs. The countryside remained quiet except for distant artillery rumble from the front lines to the south. At 22:34 hours, he reached the tree line 300 wide from Stalag 7A, the camp spread before him. 3 fence perimeters illuminated by searchlights. 9 guard towers spaced evenly around the circumference. Low barracks buildings inside the inner compound. He counted patrol movements, timing the guard rotations. Intelligence had been accurate. Pairs of guards walking the perimeter. 90 inut cycles. Overlapping coverage designed to prevent blind spots. He worked his way through the trees to the drainage ditch. The ditch ran southeast to northeast, passing within 200 wide of the camp's eastern fence before curving away. He entered the ditch at 22:41 hours and began the slow crawl toward his firing position. The ditch bottom held 3 in of freezing water. His uniform soaked through immediately. Cold penetrated his core. He ignored it, focusing on movement technique. Slow progression, minimal noise, staying below the ditch rim. The crawl took 63 minutes. Every 5 yards, he stopped to listen and observe. Search lights swept overhead twice. He heard guard dogs barking from the camp, but none approached his position. At 23:44 hours, he reached the position he'd selected from the map. A slight bend in the ditch offering clear sight lines to 3 Eastern Guard towers. He checked his watch. 4 hours, 16 minutes until shift change. He arranged his equipment carefully. 9 bolts laid out in firing order, bows strung and tested, wire cutters positioned for quick access. His hands shook from cold. He forced blood flow back into his fingers, flexing them until sensation returned. The bow required full strength to draw. Numb fingers meant missed shots. Missed shots meant death. At 23:58 hours, movement inside the camp increased. Guards began congregating near the main gate. Shift change preparation. Vincent notched his first bolt and drew the bow. The Z-150 lb draw weight engaged every muscle in his shoulders and back. He held the draw, aiming at Tower 3, the nearest eastern tower, 61 wide distant. The guard stood in profile, illuminated by the tower's worklight, smoking a cigarette. Vincent compensated for windage and the bolt's slight drop. He released at NAR 1 hours. The bolt flew in silence. It struck the guard in the upper chest, punching through uniform and rib cage. The thermite tip ignited on impact. White-hot flame erupted from the entry wound, incinerating lung tissue and creating thermal shock. The guard opened his mouth to scream, but flames had already destroyed his vocal cords. He collapsed backward, body burning at 4,000 degrees. The tower's wooden platform began smoldering. The guard never made a sound beyond the soft thud of his body hitting the platform. Vincent notched his second bolt. Tower 5, 74 wide northeast. The guard had noticed smoke from Tower 3 and was turning to investigate. Vincent drew and released in 4 seconds. The bolt caught the guard in the side as he turned. Impact, ignition, thermal destruction. The guard fell forward, flames consuming his uniform and flesh. His rifle clattered against the tower railing but didn't fall. Vincent watched for reaction from other towers. None came. The third bolt targeted Tower 7, 81 wide, maximum range for reliable accuracy. The guard stood at attention, scanning the outer perimeter. Vincent compensated for distance drop, aiming 18 in high. He released. The bolt arced slightly, dropped, and struck the guard in the lower abdomen. Not an ideal hit. The guard looked down at the burning bolt protruding from his stomach. He grabbed it, trying to pull it free. The phosphorus coating ignited his hands. Flames spread up his arms to his face. He stumbled backward and fell from the tower platform, hitting the ground inside the fence perimeter. The 20 FT fall killed him before the burns could. 3 guards down, 6 remaining. Vincent relocated 30 yards along the ditch, seeking better angles on the northern towers. He moved in absolute silence, keeping below the ditch rim. At his new position, he had clear shots at towers 1, 2, 4, and 6. He checked his watch. 9 hours. Shift change in progress. New guards would reach the towers in approximately 8 minutes. He needed to work faster. Tower 1 guard, 68 wide. Draw, compensate, release. Bolt struck the guard's throat. Thermite ignited, burning through the carotid artery and esophagus. The guard's head tilted backward as flames consumed his airway. He died in silence, collapsing against the tower railing. Tower 2 guard, 79 wide, partially obscured by the tower's corner post. Vincent waited for the guard to step into the open. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. The guard moved to check his rifle. Vincent released. The bolt caught him in the shoulder, angled down into the chest cavity. Ignition, thermal shock, immediate collapse. Tower 4 presented complications. 2 guards stood on the platform, the departing guard and his replacement, talking during handoff. Vincent needed to eliminate both before either could react. He drew his 5th bolt, aimed at the nearer guard, and released. The bolt struck center mass. Flames erupted. The guard fell. His replacement had 2 seconds to process what happened before Vincent's 6th bolt hit him in the side. Both guards burned on the platform. The wood beneath them began to smoke and char. Tower 6, 85 wide, beyond optimal range. The guard paced the platform, making targeting difficult. Vincent tracked his movement, timing the shot for when the guard paused. The guard stopped to light a cigarette. Vincent released. The bolt flew high, hitting the guard in the upper chest near the collarbone. The impact spun him backward. Thermite ignited, burning through shoulder and neck. He fell against the tower railing, body of flame, and toppled over the edge. His burning corpse landed outside the fence perimeter, 15 yards from Vincent's position. 7 guards eliminated. 2 towers remained. 8 and 9 both on the western side of the camp. Vincent couldn't reach them from his current position. He needed to circle north using the tree line for cover and find new firing angles. He gathered his remaining equipment and moved out at 14 hours. The shift change was now complete. New guards would be reaching the burned-out towers within minutes. Discovery was imminent. He ran through the trees circling the camp's northern perimeter. His soaked uniform froze in the night air. Ice crystals formed on his sleeves. He ignored the cold, focused on reaching a position with sight lines to the remaining towers. At 1:19 hours, he found a vantage point, a small rise 200 wide northwest of the camp. From here he could see towers 8 and 9. Tower 8, 93 yards extreme range. The guard stood facing inward, watching the compound. Vincent drew his 8th bolt, aimed high to compensate for distance drop, and released. The bolt arced through the air, dropping as it flew. It struck the guard in the back between the shoulder blades. The impact drove him forward against the railing. Thermite ignited, burning through his spine and internal organs. He collapsed onto the platform, flames spreading. Tower 9, the final target, 87 wide. The guard had noticed a smoke from Tower 8 and was raising his rifle, preparing to sound the alarm. Vincent had seconds. He drew his 9th and final bolt, aimed for center mass, compensated for the guard's movement, and released. The bolt struck as the guard brought the rifle to his shoulder. Impact in the chest. Ignition. The guard's finger contracted on the trigger reflexively, firing a single shot into the air before flames consumed his hand. He fell backward, rifle clattering to the platform. The rifle shot echoed across the camp. Alarms would follow within seconds. Vincent dropped the bow and ran toward the eastern fence. He had the wire cutters in hand, sprinting across open ground. Search lights began sweeping erratically. Voices shouted from inside the compound. He reached the outer fence at Zoho 2 hours and began cutting. The wire was thick, requiring both hands on the cutter handles. Each strand took 4 seconds to sever. He cut a vertical line, then horizontal cuts at top and bottom, creating a 3 FFT opening. He pushed through, cutting his hands on wire edges. The middle fence stood 8 FT ahead. More wire cutting. His hands bled freely now, making the cutter slippery. He worked frantically, aware that guards would be mobilizing. Behind him he heard dogs barking. The second fence parted. He pushed through, leaving skin on the barbs. The inner fence was 10 FT ahead. This fence carried electrical current. He could hear the humming. He used the rubber-handled cutters, praying for proper insulation. The wire sparked when cut but didn't electrocute him. Third fence breached. He was inside the compound. Barracks 9 stood 100 yards ahead, second building from the eastern end. He ran toward it in a crouch using shadows. Guards shouted from the western side of the camp, responding to the burning towers. He reached the barracks and kicked the door. American rescue. Everybody out now. He shouted it 3 times before men began emerging. The prisoners looked skeletal. Months of starvation had reduced them to walking corpses. Vincent recognized Pete Russo immediately, 20 lb lighter than Vincent remembered. Sunken eyes, ragged uniform. Pete, it's Vinny Russo from Pittsburgh. Pete stared, processing. Russo, what the hell? Vincent grabbed his shoulder. 127 men sentenced to execution at dawn. I'm getting you out. Everyone who can walk, move toward the eastern fence now. Support the wounded. We have 8 minutes. The prisoners moved with desperate urgency. Some could barely stand. Others carried their weaker friends. Vincent led them toward the breached fence using the same path he'd cut. Search lights swept the compound. Guard units were converging on the burning towers. Vincent counted men as they passed through the fence. 50, 75, 100. Pete Russo brought up the rear supporting a pilot with a broken leg. "Keep moving," Vincent shouted. 3 mi west to extraction point. They cleared all 3 fences by 31 hours. 127 men now outside the wire, moving west across open farmland. Behind them, the alarm finally sounded. Sirens wailing, searchlights scanning, voices shouting in German. Dogs barked, motorcycle engines started. The pursuit had begun. Vincent directed the prisoners toward the Treen 300 wide west. The men shuffled and limped, some barely conscious. Vincent and 3 healthier prisoners carried the 6 who couldn't walk. The cold cut through their thin prison uniforms. Vincent gave his jacket to a pilot, shivering uncontrollably. They reached the tree line at 39 hours. Vincent counted again. 124 men, 3 missing. He scanned the field behind them. 2 prisoners had collapsed 50 yards back. A third sat beside them, refusing to leave. Vincent ran back, grabbed the sitting prisoner, and dragged him toward the trees. Pete Russo returned for the other 2. They carried all 3 into the forest at 42 hours. Motorcycle headlights appeared on the road east of the camp. German pursuit teams were deploying. Vincent pushed the prisoners deeper into the forest, 2 miles west, then south to the extraction point. "Anyone who falls behind, we carry. Nobody gets left." He organized the stronger prisoners into support teams, each team responsible for helping 2 weaker men. They moved through the forest in a straggling column. Vincent brought up the rear with Pete watching for pursuit. Behind them, searchlight beams cut through the trees. Dogs barked closer now, maybe 400 wide back. The prisoners couldn't move faster. Starvation had destroyed their endurance. Several men collapsed every 100 red yards. Vincent and the support teams carried them, set them down to rest for 30 seconds, then carried them further. At 1 hour, they broke from the forest into another stretch of farmland. The extraction point lay a mile south. Vincent could see vehicle headlights in the distance, the promised truck. They crossed the open ground, completely exposed. If German units flanked them now, they'd be caught in the open. Vincent urged more speed, but the prisoners had nothing left. They moved in shambling determination, willing their destroyed bodies forward. Behind them, motorcycle engines grew louder. Vincent turned and saw headlights emerging from the forest. 4 motorcycles with sidecars, each carrying 3 German soldiers. Distance 600 wide and closing. The prisoners were 400 wide from the truck. The mathematics was simple. The Germans would overtake them before they reached safety. Vincent stopped and turned to face the pursuit. He pulled the suppressed P-45 pistol Captain Walsh had given him. Pete Russo stopped beside him. "What are you doing?" Vincent aimed at the lead motorcycle. "Buying time. Get everyone to the truck." Pete shook his head. "Not leaving you." Vincent fired. The suppressed pistol made a soft cough. The lead motorcycle's driver jerked sideways. The bike veered off the road and crashed. The 3 following motorcycles slowed, confused. Vincent fired again, hitting the second driver. That motorcycle crashed as well. The remaining 2 motorcycles stopped. Soldiers dismounted, taking cover and returning fire. Bullets cracked past Vincent's head. He grabbed Pete. "Now we run." They sprinted toward the truck, weaving as rifle rounds kicked up dirt around them. The prisoners had reached the vehicle and were climbing aboard. Vincent and Pete covered the final 100 yards at full speed. Bullets struck the truck's tailgate. They dove into the truck bed as the drivers accelerated. The truck lurched forward, engines straining under the weight of 127 emaciated men. German rifles continued firing. A bullet shattered the truck's rear window. Another punctured the roof. The driver pushed the vehicle to maximum speed, racing south on the dirt road. The German motorcycles resumed pursuit but fell behind. The truck maintained its lead. At Orusa 134 hours, the truck crossed into Allied territory. American sentries flagged them through a checkpoint. They were safe. Vincent sat in the truck bed surrounded by freed prisoners. Pete Caruso gripped his shoulder, too exhausted to speak. Around them, men wept or stared in silence. The truck delivered them to the field hospital at Irwin for 7 hours. Medics swarmed the vehicle, helping prisoners down, assessing medical conditions. Vincent climbed out last, his hands still bleeding from the wire cuts, uniform soaked and frozen, body shaking from cold and adrenaline crash. Captain Walsh appeared from the hospital tent. "Report, Corporal." Vincent straightened. "All 127 prisoners extracted successfully, sir. 9 German guards eliminated. 3 fence perimeters breached. Pursuit encountered during extraction. 2 enemy motorcycles disabled. No Allied casualties." Walsh nodded slowly. The weapon worked. Vincent thought of the burning guards, the silent kills, the medieval technology applied to modern warfare. "Yes, sir, it worked." The debriefing lasted 3 hours. Intelligence officers recorded every detail. Guard positions, tower spacing, patrol timing, fence construction, prisoner condition. They examined Vincent's hands, documenting the wire cuts. They collected the suppressed pistol. The bow had been abandoned in the ditch. Vincent hadn't retrieved it during the extraction. Officers asked about the incendiary bolts. Vincent explained the thermite phosphorus mixture, the primer ignition system, the magnesium shafts. Engineers took notes asking about draw weight and accuracy ranges. The freed prisoners provided verification. 27 men gave written statements describing the rescue. Technical Sergeant Peter Caruso testified in detail. Corporal Russo breached 3 fences alone, entered a fortified enemy camp, and led 127 condemned men to safety. He eliminated guard resistance using a weapon he designed and built himself. He carried wounded prisoners under enemy fire. Without his actions, all 127 of us would have been executed at dawn. Medical examination of the prisoners revealed severe malnutrition, multiple cases of dysentery, broken bones improperly healed, and infections from untreated wounds. Doctors estimated that, without immediate rescue, the execution schedule would have killed men already too weak to survive. Vincent's timing, arriving 8 hours before the scheduled execution, represented the difference between mass death and survival. The Army recommended Vincent for the Medal of Honor. Captain Walsh filed the initial paperwork on March 16th, citing extraordinary valor, initiative, and life-saving action against overwhelming odds. The recommendation included witness statements, after-action reports, and medical documentation of the prisoner's condition. Division Command endorsed it. Corps Command endorsed it. The paperwork moved through channels. In May 1945, the recommendation was downgraded to the Distinguished Service Cross. The official explanation cited insufficient documentation of enemy resistance. The guards had been eliminated silently before raising alarm, so there was no record of sustained combat action. Unofficially, officers mentioned that the unconventional weapon, a homemade incendiary bow, didn't fit standard valor narratives. Medals went to men who charged machine gun nests with rifles, not those who used medieval technology and modern chemistry. Vincent received the Distinguished Service Cross on June 3, 1945, at a ceremony in occupied Germany. General W.D.E. Hylop presented the medal reading the citation for extraordinary heroism in action against the enemy. Corporal Vincent Russo, on his own initiative, infiltrated a heavily fortified enemy prison camp and rescued 127 Allied prisoners scheduled for execution. Through innovative tactics and exceptional courage, he completed this mission without Allied casualties. Pete Caruso and 40 other rescued prisoners attended the ceremony. They stood and applauded when Vincent received the medal. He saluted and stepped back into formation, embarrassed by the attention. The war ended 2 months later. Vincent returned to Pittsburgh in November 1945, 23 years old, carrying a duffel bag and a medal he rarely mentioned. He walked into his father's metal working shop on Butler Street and asked for his job back. His father embraced him, asked no questions about the war, and put him back to work at the forge. Vincent resumed the life he'd left, shaping steel, building custom tools, working 6 days a week in soot and heat. Pete Russo opened a grocery store 2 blocks away, taking over his father's business. Vincent and Pete met for coffee every Saturday morning at the diner on Penn Avenue. They rarely discussed the war. When others asked about it, Pete would say, "Vinny saved my life. That's all you need to know." Vincent deflected with humor. Pete exaggerates. "I just cut some wire." The rescued prisoners knew better. Every year on March 15th, Vincent received cards and letters from men scattered across America, pilots in California, bombarders in Texas, navigators in Florida. They remembered the date. They remembered the man who refused to let them die. Vincent married in 1947, had 3 daughters, and worked the forge until retirement in 1978. He attended reunions of the rescued prisoners, gatherings held annually in different cities. By 1970, 83 of the original 127 were still alive. They flew in from across the country to shake Vincent's hand, introduce their children, and thank him again. Vincent always seemed surprised by the gratitude, as if infiltrating an enemy prison camp and rescuing 127 condemned men was just ordinary work. He died in 1994 at age 72 from heart failure, surrounded by family in his Pittsburgh home. The funeral drew over 300 people. 54 of the rescued prisoners attended. Men now in their 70s, some in wheelchairs, all determined to pay respects. They stood honor guard at the casket. Pete Russo delivered the eulogy. Vincent Russo was a metal worker who learned to shape steel in his father's forge. When he needed to save his friends, he applied those skills to an impossible problem. He built a weapon that shouldn't work, infiltrated a fortress that couldn't be breached, and brought home men everyone else had written off as dead. He never bragged. He never sought recognition. He just did the work that needed doing. That was Vinny. The Distinguished Service Cross is displayed at the Hins History Center in Pittsburgh, part of an exhibit on World War II veterans from western Pennsylvania. The placard mentions the rescue of 127 prisoners, but doesn't detail the incendiary bow. That information remains in declassified after-action reports available to military historians. The weapon itself was never recovered. It likely remains buried in a drainage ditch outside Merseburg, Germany, alongside 9 spent thermite bolts and the memory of guards who died in silent flames. Post-war analysis of Vincent's mission revealed several factors that made success possible. First, the shift change timing created a 12-minute window of reduced tower coverage, a vulnerability German security procedures didn't address. Second, the incendiary bolts produced thermal shocks so severe that victims died before their nervous systems could trigger alarm responses. Third, Vincent's metalwork background gave him unique capability to design and build specialized equipment under time pressure. Fourth, his willingness to risk a solo infiltration eliminated coordination problems that doomed larger rescue attempts. Modern military historians classify Vincent's rescue among the most successful prisoner extractions of World War II. Similar missions attempted by larger forces typically failed. The 1945 raid on Cabanatuan in the Philippines succeeded, but required 120 Army Rangers and extensive planning. Vincent accomplished comparable results alone with 6 hours preparation, using a weapon he designed from salvaged materials. His success validated the principle that creative problem-solving sometimes outperforms conventional tactics. The rescued prisoners went on to live full lives. Technical Sergeant Peter Russo operated his grocery store for 42 years, raised 5 children, and died in 2001 at age 81. First Lieutenant James Mallory returned to his engineering career, patented 12 agricultural innovations, and credited Vincent's rescue with giving him a second chance at meaningful work. Captain Robert Finch became a high school teacher, influencing thousands of students, and always began each school year by telling his students about the metal worker who refused to abandon condemned men. Of the 127 rescued prisoners, 119 survived the war. 8 died in subsequent combat operations before Germany surrendered. The survivors returned to civilian life. Teachers, engineers, businessmen, farmers, factory workers. They married, had children, built ordinary lives that would have ended in a German execution yard if Vincent Russo hadn't spent 6 hours building an impossible weapon and 8 minutes eliminating 9 guards who never saw the burning arrows coming. If you found this story compelling, please like this video. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Thank you for keeping these stories